Welcome to Enroute, the podcast of the First Responder Behavioral Health Institute. The First Responder Behavioral Health Institute is bringing together some of the most inspiring and dedicated change agents in the global public safety, psychotherapy, and educational communities. Each episode of Enroute seeks to bring together first responder change agents and clinicians dedicated to constructively disrupting the status quo by tackling the tough subjects like first responder suicide, post-traumatic stress, moral injury, sanctuary trauma, leadership development, critical incident response, peer support teams, and what it means to be psychologically safe and healthy while working in an unsafe world. All units, please stand by. The Enroute podcast is about to begin. You can resume normal traffic on this channel after this transmission. Welcome to this Enroute special edition. I'm Joseph Burgundy. The focus of this three-part series is children's advocacy. We're going to examine how first responders can benefit from collaborating with child advocacy centers during the investigation of crimes against children. Continuing education units may be available for first responders, therapists, nurses, and physicians, depending on your state's local regulations. In this three-part series, we will examine the child advocacy model and why it's so important in helping you help an at-risk child. We will examine how first responders can take advantage of the many resources child advocacy centers have at their disposal to help you help the child and the family in crisis. We will offer insights and strategies for how to interact with this model effectively. And lastly, we will examine the question of secondary trauma that first responders themselves can face and experience during these critical incidents and extremely challenging calls for service. Today, we welcome Janeth Peterson, Assistant Director of Forensic Services, and Mark Bradford, Chief External Relations Officer for the Dallas Child Advocacy Center, to episode 2 of this three-part series. If you haven't had the opportunity to view episode 1, where we sit down with Burch, President and CEO of the Dallas Children's Advocacy Center, and explore what child advocacy models are all about, we encourage you to do so. Please join me in welcoming Janeth and Mark to Enroute. Janeth Peterson, Mark Bradford, welcome to this special edition of Enroute. We're glad you're here, and we're looking forward to visiting with you both today. Janeth, why don't you go ahead and tell our viewers a little bit about you and your background, and a little bit about the Child Advocacy Center.
Sure. So my name is Janeth Peterson. I am the Assistant Director of Forensic Services at the Dallas Children's Advocacy Center. I've been there almost 1 year. I have been doing forensic interviewing for almost 12 years now. I started off as a CPS investigator. Now it's called Child Protective Investigations. Back then it was called Child Protective Services, which I feel like is what most people know them by, CPS. So I started my career as a CPS investigator straight out of college. And I did that for about a year, and then started working at the Advocacy Center that I did my internship in and to finish my undergrad. And I've been doing interviewing ever since. I did at some point move out to Northern California, and I did forensic interviewing there. So I got an opportunity to really get to see the model out in California and how it compares to the one here in Texas. And I came back and started working at the Dallas Child Advocacy Center. Then went back to a different center, and now I'm back here again in Dallas as the assistant director. So overall, I've been in child abuse for about 13 years now. And honestly, I really love the work that we're doing at DCAC.
Outstanding. Challenging and noble profession and effort, and I'm looking forward to asking you a whole bunch more questions about what it's like to be a forensic interviewer during our broadcast. But let me switch over and ask Mark a little bit about his background and what brought you into this line of work, sir.
So thank you, Joseph. So my name is Mark Bradford. I'm the Chief External Relations Officer. That's a fancy word for my job is to make sure that our 28 law enforcement partners, our medical or CPS, DA's office, all work well together. We all communicate. We all function as a multidisciplinary team to have the best outcome that we can have for our victims and our families. My professional career is I'm actually retired law enforcement. I spent 25 years with the Mesquite Police Department, which is about 120,000 people, 130,000 people, 225 sworn officers, so a good sized department. And during my career there, I was actually a child abuse detective. So I spent 6 years working child abuse. My former forensic interviewer, one of my former forensic interviewers, is actually now Burch, who is the CEO here at the Dallas Children's Advocacy Center. And so when she became the CEO, she reached out to me and said, "Hey, I have a position. Would you be interested in coming to work in this field?" And I tell people all the time that the 6 years I spent working child abuse were probably some of the most difficult but rewarding 6 years of my career. And I'm happy to be back at the DCAC helping victims and families.
You two bring a wealth of experience and a well-rounded background into such a challenging topic of investigation in an area for mental health and family services. So let's go ahead and set our first responders up for success. One of my first questions for you, Janeth, is how do you become a forensic interviewer? What is that process like? And, tell us more about how that process looks when it unfolds.
Sure. So just becoming a forensic interviewer in general, every state is going to be different. And so I'm really going to be talking about what forensic interviewing looks like here in the state of Texas. So for my center itself and the other center that I worked at, most interviewers hold a 4-year degree in, anything related to criminal justice, sociology, psychology, social work. My undergrad is in child development and family studies, and I have my master's, and I'm a licensed social worker in the state of Texas. And so any 4-year degree to become a forensic interviewer. And then from there, our interviewers, when they're hired on, they go to Austin. And kind of think of Austin as our headquarters. So we have our umbrella headquarters, and we call them CAC of Texas, so Child Advocacy Centers of Texas. And they are really the ones that create our protocols, our structures and policies on how we interview children here in Texas when they're alleging some form of child abuse. And so we go down there and we train. We go down there 3 times a year. We have 3 blocks is really what we call them. And so once all 3 blocks are completed, you are an official forensic interviewer. And then there's ongoing training. Like any profession, we have certain standards that we have to meet in order to be in compliance with the CAC of Texas standards that are required of forensic interviewers. So that's, X amount of trainings, things that we have to peer review. Peer review is really us observing each other's forensic interviews and giving feedback on what we could have done differently. And so we do that locally and with other CACs in the state, which is really beneficial, right? Because, when you're not getting any feedback, how else are you going to learn how to interview children, with best practice? And so that's really how one individual here in the state of Texas becomes a forensic interviewer.
Tell me a little bit about what the process looks like when we call you guys in Dallas County. If you're a police officer or a firefighter, paramedic on scene, or a school teacher or a therapist with an outcry, how does somebody get a hold of you? And then once they do, what happens next?
I think what's really important for our first responders to understand is what is a forensic interview to begin with, right? And so what I normally tell a panel of jurors, I always say, the forensic interview is really the entry point of an investigation. So the interview itself, I'll kind of break it down. It is a legally defensible, neutral, information finding interview conducted by a trained professional, and it's typically requested by law enforcement, and some CACs in Texas will allow Child Protective Services to request them. Specifically for DCAC, or the Dallas Children's Advocacy Center, we typically have all of our forensics done at the request of law enforcement. And so when we talk about, what it is for an interview to be neutral, as a forensic interviewer, we are neutral in that setting. We go in, we gather all of our information, all the details about what this child has to say, because ultimately a forensic interview is a child's statement. It is a statement of, something that may or may not have happened, right? And so we are gathering all information for our partners, and they determine what happens next, right? And so when I talk about being a neutral individual, we don't have a say. We are neutral in the room. We don't get to decide what happens next or where this child goes. That's really not up to us. And so we gather all that information for our partners. And so as far as, how does one get to us? It's really our first responders. They're the ones that are out in the field to, get the call, and they're the first ones out on the scene. And if our first responders have that knowledge of, there's this place that exists, I remember hearing about it, something about a child advocacy center, there's people there that are trained professional to work these type of investigations. Let me see who I can reach out to so that we could potentially bring this child to the child advocacy center, so that those trained forensic interviewers, those professionals that speak to kids, they can be the ones that gather all the information versus me, the first responder on the scene.
Excellent. Thank you for giving us a sense of the pathway. I know in the times when I've utilized you in my years as a school counselor, you just reminded me the first thing I did was got a hold of our community resource officer, our police officer at the school, brought that individual in, and usually within 20 to 30 minutes, we're en route to your center and meeting with some of your people. Which brings me to my next question for Mark. You're an officer out on patrol, and you're working in the community, and one of these calls for service comes over the radio for you. How do you best manage that call, and how do you facilitate getting a hold of these kind of services in a quick and professional manner?
I think every officer, whether they'll admit it or not, when they hear this type of call, they always ask for take a deep breath. It's like, man, I don't want to go deal with this. And we understand that. And this is going to be one of the few times where we'll tell you less is more, right? Instead of going in there with your typical, just give me the facts and try to get all the questions and all the answers for your report. We really just need you to show up on scene and take the information that's already been disclosed by the child to the adult, and just use that for your report. We don't need you to interview the child. In most cases, we don't want you to interview the child. So what with the outcry witnesses, or who the person who is the first adult the child told, will usually have enough facts and information for you to do your report. And so in larger agencies, I know they have the luxury of having multiple people that work these types of offenses. So at that point, we would ask you to reach out to the detective that works these type of cases and go, hey, I'm out here at this location. This is what the child has told the mother, or the child has told the nurse, or the child has told the teacher. What do you want me to do next? And so that less is more approach, and just taking what they've already told an adult, document that in your report, notify either your supervisor or the detective, and let them tell you the next steps. And Joseph, I think what you said earlier, 28 or 30 minutes later, you're going to be down at the center. In most cases, if the victim is being abused by somebody in the household, that's probably exactly how that's going to work. Within an hour and a half, they're going to be down here at the CAC in front of a Janeth or one of her excellent interviewers, trying to get to the facts of what happened, what took place, or what's been going on, and how long it's been happening for.
Absolutely. As a clinician in the state of Texas and a prior first responder of 35 years, I've handled it both ways, out on the rescue truck and in the community, and then as a school counselor and within systems. And as I teach young clinicians, when these outcries happen, we want to go ahead and be there for the child, and don't say, stop talking. This is, don't traumatize the child more, but more recognize they trusted you to talk to you about something very difficult, and letting them know I'm here for you. And most importantly, the handoff. When I have had these cases, letting them know that's not, the police officer I worked with, a female police sergeant, stepping into the room in her full uniform. That's very intimidating to a child, and letting them know, this is Nicole and she's a friend of mine. and I trust her. And I'm glad you trusted me, and I want you to go ahead and let her know what's happening, and then we're going to go ahead and find a way to help you today. So a positive handoff, letting that conversation wind down, but more importantly, don't be picking questions, don't be interrogating, interviewing, satisfying your curiosity. It's enough that the outcry has happened. Let the people who are best trained to do this ask these questions one time under controlled circumstances so that they can go ahead and get the best results. So tell us a little bit more about that process. So within a half hour, we're transported to one of your facilities. What happens next?
Yeah. So at DCAC, we just now hired our 7th forensic interviewer. So we have 7 phenomenal forensic interviewers. Many of them are bilingual, so they provide that service for, a lot of our clients are Spanish speaking. And then we obviously have a partnership with an agency that provides interpretation services because we are always hoping to, meet the needs of our clients. And so providing the language, their native language, is always important. So 7 fantastic forensic interviewers on our team. And then myself, and then my director, Elena, he also conducts forensic interviews as well. So we have a really strong team. And so what happens next is the child will typically be transported. If we're really looking at it like if first responders are the one transporting. So we have that all the time, right? Patrol officers, some form of first responder is bringing them to the agency. They also get to typically be a part of our pre-staffing, which is what we call kind of like a meeting before we all go into the interview. And so that's really important for first responders to know too, is you're the first person with the information. So whatever you're about to tell me, I might keep that in my mind as I'm interviewing this kid. So, I remember that he said, that he told mom this or whatever it may be, right? So it's really important that our first responders know what it is that this child has said, obviously was with as much limited questioning, right? And so we always welcome our first responders to be a part of that pre-staffing since they were the first person that responded. And so a pre-staffing typically looks like, what is it that we know? How did this come in? How was it reported? What was asked? Kind of gathering all that information. And then from there, well, let me back up. Typically in those pre-staffings, the people that are involved are the detective that is probably going to be assigned the case or whoever is able to observe at that time. If Child Protective Services is involved, then they will also be present. Typically, CPS is involved if it's an in-home perpetrator or this alleged perpetrator has access to the child in some way or another. And so the forensic interviewer is involved. Our family advocates who do a really great job of supporting our caregivers through the process, they are involved. Sometimes our multidisciplinary coordinators are involved, and their role is really to kind of coordinate the cases. And yeah, those are typically the people that are normally involved in our pre-staffing. So we gather all the information, and then the forensic interviewer goes and gets the kid, introduces themselves, who they are, what today will look like. And then we bring them back into our rooms. And it's just the child and the interviewer in the room. Law enforcement, CPS, they are watching from a different room, and they are observing live. So they're watching live as the interviewer is going on, and the interviewer, starts their process. They do something that it's called an introduction phase. We introduce ourselves, kind of talk about the room and what that morning's going to look like or that afternoon's going to look like. We do something called rapport building, really getting to know the child. And while the child is talking, we're really looking for, language, like where are they at developmentally? We're really assessing their skills and how they might be able to narrate the events that may or may not have happened, right? And so we're doing a lot of assessing in that rapport building. And so once we feel really comfortable with the child, we start moving into what we call the introduction of topics. So tell me what you came to talk to me about today. And that's typically when children, say why they are there. And sometimes they have no idea why they're there. And so there's other line of questioning that we go down to kind of get to why they're there. Obviously, all of our interviews are informed, so we have some information going to the interview. And then once we feel like we've gathered every detail about what the child has told us, at some point we take a break and we'll meet with our partners. And sometimes our partners will have further questions about, hey, go back in there and ask this, or, whatever questions they may be. Now, obviously, if we as a forensic interviewer don't feel like the question is appropriate or it's not really child friendly, we have complete control of what we say in the room. And so we'll ask our detectives or our CPS workers, like, what is it that you're trying to, know? Like, what, tell me what you want to know. And then I will try to think of the best way to ask this question in a way that's legally defensible, right? Because at the end of the day, I'm going to be the one on the stand defending my interview and why I felt it was best practice. So I'll go back in, ask, follow-up questions, and then we'll conclude the interview after that. We'll take them into the activity center, which is really a child-friendly waiting room. And we have our family advocate team in there to sit with our kid and really comfort them post-interview.
Mm-hmm. One of my next questions is perhaps best answered by Mark or both of you. How does this process benefit the investigators and the district attorneys as they try to work through this process?
I think when you talk about the focus of the CAC or the model of the CAC, when it brings together a multidisciplinary team, when it's with CPS and medical, the DA's office and law enforcement, those things that we call our partners that Janeth referenced, this benefits the child most, right? Because we talk about limiting the number of times that a child is re-traumatized or re-victimized by telling the story. Now, that also has benefits for us, right? The interviews that Janeth, their team conduct, get great information for law enforcement so they can file charges. It gets great information for CPS so they can make a decision on whether or not they're going to remove the child or how they have to find a safe place for the child. And ultimately, the goal of all this, if we get to criminal charges, is the successful prosecution by the DA's office. This model benefits them because a child isn't telling their story over and over and over again. And each time they tell their story, they're being introduced language by other adults. And so their story really morphs from what their original outcry was into what other people have interjected into them, which just causes complications when we get to a trial, right? Because a defense attorney is going to get up there and say, well, they told the teacher this, and then they told the counselor this, and they told the principal this, and they told the detective this. And so they're going to go through and say the child told 6 different stories. And we understand that happens just because the child will start using some of that language that the other people have given them because they're not trained experts like our forensic interviewers. And so the ultimate goal when we come in or when patrol or detectives bring that child in is for that fact gathering information. So that way we can lead to the successful prosecution. When Janeth was talking about our family advocates and our therapists, that's really just the back end of what happens, right? That's us taking that child and that family and doing our best to reduce the amount of trauma or reduce the effects of the long-term trauma that it might have on the child or their family. So the CAC model really is a holistic approach that is child-focused to reduce the trauma, really support the family through this difficult time. Oh, yeah. And on the back end, we want to put bad guys in jail, which that's what all law enforcement wants to do.
Absolutely. And, one of the things I've tried to teach my young clinicians, and you guys cover parents re-interviewing the child, a well-intentioned teacher or counselor re-asking these questions. And I think you really covered a lot about the damage that can do to the prosecution and to the child's psyche. Any other thoughts on that? That's just basically standard protocol. You leave the interview questions to the professionals and stay on it.
Yeah. I think for me, as a forensic interviewer, I've seen this many times where, so much questioning of the child in the field can really impact the forensic interview itself. And Mark said it really well, this kid will say one thing to, patrol and then another one to CPS. And by the time they come to me, a lot of people have already talked to them. And I've had many times where kids will say like, I've already told so-and-so this, or I already told them, I don't want to say it again. And it like that really impacts, the interview itself. And so when, our first responders are in the field, just know that forensic interviewers exist and we are here to help. And so bringing them to us so that we can get all that information is best practice. Also, and I don't think our first responders are, maybe they're thinking this, but not in the moment, I don't think, but some of these cases will end up going to trial. And, sometimes parole officers have to testify. And so if you leave all of those questions to the forensic interviewer, we are going to be the ones that are going to be able to get on the stand and testify as to the questioning that we did. And we can back that up, right? Because we're trained in it. We know how to properly ask questions, all the things, right? And so really leaving that to us so that they don't have to potentially do that themselves. And I know sometimes they will, but just letting them know, letting our first responder audience know that, and like Mark said, sometimes they get really nervous about questioning kids in the field. Leave that to us. That's what we are here. We're here to aid in these types of investigations.
And Joseph, I think you said something earlier about, when the child is talking to the outcry witness, is to let them still continue to talk without asking questions when you're the school counselor. And I think that's a good point to mention, is that, that to reaffirm that child and what they're saying, so that way it's easier for Janeth and them when they get to the forensic interview. But one of the things that we tell our first responders is when they talk to them, when they leave those last instructions with their parents, right? With the parent of the child, is like, hey, let's just say what we call a priority one, which is what the suspect is actually in the house and the child is going to be in danger, which is what would precipitate a forensic interview today. Let's say it's an uncle, right, that she doesn't have access to. Those instructions that we leave with patrol is, hey, tell the mom, one, don't interview the child. Don't ask the child any questions. But if the child comes to you and wants to talk about it, listen, take everything that she is, and then say, I'm really proud of you. We're going to take you to talk to somebody in a few days. I need you to tell them everything. Right. And so, again, reaffirming that child that I'm hearing you, I'm listening to you, but here in a day or two, you're going to go talk to somebody who's a complete stranger in Janeth, their team. And it's okay to sit down in that room and tell them everything you told me. And then after the forensic interview, the family advocates and the therapists can give them further steps on how to get them through this situation. But in that moment, we've got to make sure we tell our parents, don't interview your kids, don't quiz your kids, don't probe and dig. Just take what they tell you, reaffirm, and then tell them that in a few days you're going to talk to somebody. And it really, really is imperative that they go into that room and just be honest and open with the forensic interviewer.
Mark, I'm so glad that you brought that up. And as I tell young clinicians, if you are upset, it's going to come out. You're going to scare the child. Let it organically wind down. Be supportive. Be affirming. Show trust and faith in your partners. I believe in Officer Nicole. I've worked with her and I trust her. Statements like that, like, well, if Mr. Burgundy trusts her, I should, trust her too. So kind of creating an opening for your partners to go ahead and support this child through a difficult process. One of the things you just mentioned is reaffirming them. As this outcry happens, I recognize this is one of the bravest moments in this young person's life where they chose to come forward. And how do we reaffirm them in the best ways and let them know we're here for them without prying and probing and interfering with an investigative interview? What are some of the things you guys say to children?
Well, a lot of kids will say, I'm afraid to say, or I'm afraid to tell. And we have a unique line of questioning to kind of get down to the bottom of that, right? Tell me more about feeling scared. Tell me more about, not wanting to tell mom, really exploring, it's kind of like what as forensic interviewers we're trained to do is to explore, right? Kind of get down to the bottom of what is really, behind that behavior. And so in the interview room itself, though, it's really hard because, the interview itself is not therapeutic. It's not interrogative either. So we do have to kind of be a little careful of what we say to the child because, I'll be honest, there have been times where kids will say, like, what's going to happen to me? And in the room, like, I might have an idea of what's going to happen, but it's not my place to say. So there are statements like these empathic statements that we use in the interview room. I hear that you're scared, and I can see why you would be scared, and kind of like reiterate, their reasoning, and just really validating and acknowledging what they have to say, and being honest with them is so important. That's how you build that trust. Honestly, I don't know the answer to that. However, there are people in this building that might be able to help you get that answer. But it's not up to me what happens next. But tell me more about why you're so worried about going home. Really kind of exploring, because that's also going to give insight to our partners, right? To determine, okay, what's going on? Like what is their fear? And something else that's really important for our first responders to know is that disclosure is a process. We talk about that all the time with kids. Kids disclose at different rates. There are still adults today that have never talked about the trauma that they might have endured as a child. And so when we talk about children coming forward and disclosing, it's a process. And it's sometimes very hard for kids to disclose. So like Mark said, if a child comes to you and says that something has happened to them, really just acknowledging what they're saying, right? And now, whether it's true or not true, whatever the case may be, that's not up to that person to determine, right? Leave that to the professionals to, begin their investigation and whatnot. But I think it's really just like acknowledging what the child has said and then bringing them to a child-friendly environment to kind of start that process. And something else I will say is we, as forensic interviewers, as neutral parties, we will then inform our family advocates that, hey, this child has concerns that, mom's going to be mad after, she has told me all these things. And then our family advocates, they do such a great job of providing that emotional support. And that's where our roles differ, right? We can, again, use so many empathic statements in the interview room, but then our family advocates, they do a phenomenal job of supporting that family through that process, supporting our kids after the forensic interview is complete.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. One of the things,
and Joseph, just quick, I think that's something for the first responders to remember is, we talked about just again the advantages for a law enforcement point, but really Janeth said it great. Like there's so many advantages for the family on the back end of this that are really, really imperative that they get linked up with. And even if we can't provide therapy because they live too far away, our family advocates will reach out and find therapeutic services closer to them. And so, it really is that family advocacy team's job to remove barriers so these kids can come in and get the support they need after they've disclosed, after they've been forensically interviewed, and after they figured out what's happening, whether it be to their, to an uncle or to a stepdad or to a dad or whoever it may be, right? To make sure that that whole family is put back together the best way that we can.
I appreciate your mentioning that, and I want to talk a little bit towards the end about how we link them up with those resources. Well, one of the things that really hit, Janeth, that you talked about is this disclosure process. I'm still a treating clinician, and I work with a lot of complex trauma survivors. And I will find that someone has been with me in the clinical suite for an average of 9 to 18 months. And then it's usually a doorknob conversation, the last 5 minutes of the session, and they're getting ready to leave. Oh, by the way, I've been meaning to talk to you about my uncle when I was age 12. And this is a person in their 40s or 50s. I immediately go, wait a minute now. I go back through my files because I know I asked a very comprehensive set of questions on our intake questionnaire about adverse childhood experiences, early childhood trauma. They absolutely did not disclose that. I didn't fail to do a good interview on my way in. But here we are somewhere between 9 to 18 months into our clinical treatment. And then they disclose these things. And they've been sitting with them for 30, 40, and 50 years. So it is just such a challenging thing to want to go ahead and finally get off your chest and finally speak about as a mature adult. And, the fact that a young child is doing this at such an early age, willing to be that brave, willing to be that vulnerable, they need all the support they can get. And that's why I just love you guys and have such respect for what you do and how challenging it is. And as a first responder and as a therapist, I've had to call on these services, and it is such a relief to have people who specialize in this area available, and I've never seen anything but the highest levels of professionalism and absolute dedication to the cause. So, that's why we were honored to consider doing this special presentation of Enroute. Another question I have for you is some of the benefits that maybe our law enforcement agencies don't see outside of child abuse. When you conduct a forensic interview, sometimes other things come up that are beneficial to the system. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So, outside of child abuse, there's other units, and Mark, you might have to help me out here. One specifically that I'm thinking about, and it's kind of an example that came up a couple of months ago, was our narcotics unit at a certain agency, and this narcotics detective had called me, and he said, "Hey, I got your phone number from a detective that used to work child crimes. He said that you might be able to help me." And I was like, "Okay, what's going on?" And he said that, they had done, a big drug bust and that there were kids involved. And he was like, "I was really just kind of like going to disregard, the kid piece of it. It was more about like the drugs, right? And excited about all these drugs that they had gotten." But he said that he had like an inkling, like, I don't know. I feel like the kids may know something. And so he reached out to this detective that used to work child crimes. And then the detective was like, "Yeah, it may be worth reaching out to them. They might be able to, get those kids in and see if they know anything about the drugs or, traffic and how it started, whatever it may be." Right. So I was like, absolutely. And so I gave him a rundown of what the forensic interview process was. And he was like, "Yeah, I think it's worth a shot. Why not? I mean, they may or may not know something." So brings in the kids, and the kids completely just provide these child-friendly details that, a kid shouldn't know, but they did because they saw it, they smelled it, they, observed everything that was happening. And so they were able to kind of give corroboration in these statements with some of the things that, these detectives have found. And when I took my break, the detective was like, his eyes were huge. And he said, "Oh, wow, that was way more than I thought we were going to get from these kids." And I think that's the thing, is that we underestimate kids. We underestimate their potential because they're kids, right? Especially our kids that have intellectual disabilities, autism, Down syndrome, any kind of intellectual disability. We automatically assume that they don't know anything. You would be surprised what kids see, what they smell. And that's something that we are constantly trying to gather in the interview, is these sensory details. What did you see? What did you smell? What did you taste? What could you hear? Because it's really like what they have witnessed or what they have experienced. And so going back to this narcotics detective, he came back again later, like a couple months later, to do another interview. And so it's really about like building those relationships with our partners that typically don't utilize the Child Advocacy Center, and just knowing that, we exist. There's a profession out there that, talks to kids about these types of things. Let's bring them to the Child Advocacy Center to see if, these kids have witnessed anything, even though it has nothing to do with, the types of cases that we have in building. We're always here to help. Sometimes, there might be evidence, bruises on a kid. I always encourage our partners to take pictures, write down exactly what you witnessed, what you observed out in the field, because we can use that information in the forensic interview. "Hey, I heard that whenever patrol came and knocked on your door, you we're holding something that might be of value to the investigation." I don't know, whatever it may be, right? So I always encourage our partners to really pay attention to our kids. Don't disregard them just because it's, domestic violence or a drug case. Like, it's very beneficial to, your investigation. So utilize this.
And Joseph, I think what Janeth says is perfect, because we talk with our partners all the time. This isn't just about child abuse, right? We're talking about violent felonies, narcotics, robberies, murders, anything like that, where you have a serious felony offense where you have a child who was witness or could have been a witness or may have been a witness, we encourage you to reach out to Janeth and her team, have that conversation about, this is what I've got and this is what I know, can y'all do this? And I know her answer is going to be sure. There's a lot of great experience in there that can sit down and put their heads together, try to figure, okay, how are we going to formulate these questions? How are we going to get to figure out exactly what this child saw? And so I brought a witness to a murder down here before when I was working child abuse, helping out the robbery homicide guides. And they didn't get much information, right? Because the child was only 4, but they were able to figure out enough to piece together some of the things they didn't know about what happened during the offense. And so it doesn't hurt to ask. It doesn't hurt to reach out to, us here at the DCAC or your advocacy centers in your area and say, hey, this is what I got. Is this something y'all can do? And more likely, we're going to do whatever we can to help out the investigation.
And also, when we think about kids, typically the age range that we interview at DCAC is anywhere from 3 or 4. I mean, you'd be surprised how many vocal 3-year-olds there are. I know mine were very vocal, but we also interview into young adulthood. So even though 18 is kind of like, okay, you're an adult now. Well, we have a lot of, young adults, or we have a lot of young adults who are, have some kind of intellectual disability that prevents them from really communicating, and they're vulnerable, right? This is a vulnerable population. And what we've learned is that children with disabilities are more at risk for being abused. I mean, that's just a fact. They're more vulnerable. And I think that perpetrators know that. They use that to their advantage. And so for our first responders, knowing that if you come into contact with a young adult, maybe they're in their 20s, we could still interview them. We have also interviewed people for adult protective services. So even though they're not technically children, we still interview young adults with intellectual disabilities. So knowing that, also, we've had several cases where, our first responders have been called out and the child is what people say they're nonverbal. And I did the air quotes because that child's needs are met in some way or another, right? So even though they don't speak, they can still communicate. And I think a lot of people just don't know that us as trained interviewers, we have ways to be able to gather information without the child vocalizing what it is that happened to them. I mean, we've done interviews where the child, nodded yes, no, squeezed their hand for yes, no. I mean, we just have different techniques that are backed up by research and their best practices in order to be able to find out if something has or hasn't happened to this child. So just knowing that even if a kid doesn't speak, don't just, dismiss them because they don't, quote, speak. Bring them to us. We can figure out from there what we can do.
This is such an important message, and so many of our first responders don't have this understanding. They barely understand what you folks do. And when they do, they pigeonhole it into child crimes, maybe human trafficking or child sexual abuse. But what they're not seeing and what really needs to be heard here is that truly forensic interviewing and the work you do is with disadvantaged populations. And if that disadvantaged population is an elderly person or someone with limited communication speaking abilities, they can still benefit from reaching out to you guys and asking questions and seeing if you guys have, better to get your opinion and have you say, this is not something we can help with, than to not take advantage of the opportunity to broaden their understanding of what happened out there. Because they could have had the privilege of meeting with a forensic interviewer who could have added so much value while they're trying to struggle to piece together what happened out there.
No, I think that's an excellent point is you don't know until you ask. And so everybody in this CAC model is really, really, really doing everything we can to benefit the victim. And that victim is not a certain age or a certain sex or a certain mental capabilities. It really is anybody that we can support and help to our services.
One of the test questions I always give when I work with folks is, what does CPS stand for? Everybody knows, Child Protective Services. What does APS stand for? and the room is silent. Nobody understands or even knows that there's an adult protective services, or that as the aging can become more vulnerable to family members and other predators who are, not out there for their best interest, and they don't understand that that's a very vulnerable population, and that there's an entire agency dedicated to their protection as well. Now, one of the other questions I have for both of you is, what next? What if I want to go ahead and get connected with my local child advocacy center? What should I do? And more importantly, if I don't have a local child advocacy center, now what?
How do you locate your nearest CAC? So the Child Advocacy Center of Texas has a list of all of them in Texas. And there's over 70 CACs in Texas. There's also over 800 CACs across the United States. And so just a simple Google search will be beneficial to you, or just reach out to your nearest largest county, and they'll be able to direct you in the area that you need to go. There are some CACs that serve 3 or 4 or 5 counties in the more rural areas, unlike ours, where we just serve one. And just because we serve only our county doesn't mean we're not open to bringing other outside agencies in if they just sit down and have a request for us. So it really, really just depends on where you live and how far you have to drive. And so let's just say we're not close to a CAC. What do you do? What are some tips that you can do if you say, I've tried everything, I'm not close to one? Well, again, reach out to us, reach out to your nearest one and say, okay, I have to interview this child. What do I need to do? Well, first off, don't interview them in the house or the area that the abuse took place in, right? Don't interview them in front of somebody. You never know who the abuser might be if you don't have a good outcry. So you got to find that child neutral, child-friendly environment where they feel comfortable. And then just don't ask leading questions. And that's really, really hard, I think, for law enforcement. And as somebody who's tried to sit down and interview a child before, because of the circumstances that presented it, not being able to do that is really, really difficult. And Janeth, I'm sure, has some great tips. And I forget the line they use, like it's like, what's next, or what happened after that? And it's amazing how much information they can get by just asking that little bitty phrase. And so, again, this whole network across the nation is all about support. It's all about making sure that everybody has the tools that they need. And if there's a way that we can get you in here or help you find someplace close to you, great. And if we can't, then we'll do our best to coach you and to give you tips. And, Jeff, like I said, Janeth and her team will be more than capable of saying, okay, let's guide you through this process.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Like I said, we have 7 forensic interviewers. They are expertise in, our area. And honestly, and I'm not saying this just because I work at DCAC, I'm a little biased, but I truly believe that we are, one of the leading experts in forensic interviewing, and, the way that we work these types of investigations through a multidisciplinary approach. And so if people have questions about, okay, well, what can I ask in the field? Please reach out to us. I'll connect you to one of our interviewers. They can guide you, do a one-on-one with you. And we always have trainings, and I think we'll kind of talk about that here in a little bit, but trainings on, what to ask, what not to ask. We're always open to, educating our partners, because I think that ultimately comes down to a lack of education, right? People can only know so much. And if they go out into the field and ask questions, well, it's probably because they didn't know, right? They didn't know that wasn't the best practice or best protocol. And so asking, right? And I think Mark said this, you won't know until you ask or try. So please reach out to us, and I'd be happy, to have a conversation with you, or our interviewers would be happy to meet with you to talk about the line of questioning. Because, Mark, talked about, leading questions. That is definitely one of the line of questionings that as forensic interviewers, we tend to avoid. We're not going to lead a child to tell us that something did happen, right? That's not, the goal of our questioning. And the question that Mark was talking about, it's kind of like the forensic interviewer statement. It's tell me everything about, tell me, because it's very open-ended, right? It's not a yes, no question. It's not very direct. It's not multiple choice. Although those are lines of questioning that we use, we always want the child to narrate everything that they possibly can until they exhaust that questioning. And then we'll kind of narrow in a little bit more direct or more focused questioning, we always try to go back to tell me everything about that. Tell me everything about that. And then what happened? And then what happened? And so just kind of letting the kid narrate what they might or might not have experienced.
Okay. One of the things that is good as these centers are growing, obviously we don't have enough of them. So if I'm rural law enforcement, if I'm several hours away, if I cannot get a hold of you guys, how do I handle this myself? If I have to host the interview, will you guys do a telephone consult with me and help structure me? How will that work?
Yeah, if you now we won't do a teleforensic interview for like if our forensic interviewer is here and your child's there. That we don't do, right? In rare cases, we will. If a child is in a hospital, we'll send a forensic interviewer locally to go do a forensic interview in a hospital room or a different location. But we will, if you need help, reach out to Janeth and her team, and we'll sit down for you, like what you talked about, in like a pre-staffing, and just give you a list of tips of do's and don'ts, right? What do you do if you get stuck? And Janeth talked about the narrative process and tell me more. And I think a lot of people have a tendency to think that their kid's not going to be able to articulate, what happened or what goes on. And it's really just the opposite. It's that simple prompt of tell me more or what happened next really, really does get that child going. And so I think if they reach out to a forensic interviewer and really have them build their confidence ahead of time, like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm going to give you the tools to go in there and you're going to be just fine. And if you make a mistake, it's okay. Like, it's okay. If you ask the wrong question or if you phrase it wrong, it's all right. But just try to remember that we're not asking those leading questions, that we really want them to use their own language, their own verbiage. And that's something else that you talk about, right? Is, we've heard kids call body parts some of the craziest names throughout our years, but that's the word that they're used to using. And so you as an interviewer, and I'm Janeth will talk about this because he's way better than I am at interview, right? They'll use that word over and over again because that's the child's word, right? They're not changing the child's word. They're not embellishing the child's word. If that's their body part, that's what they said happened. And that's what they're going to keep using over and over and over again. And us as adults want to either make it more grammatically correct or make it more anatomically correct. But no. That's the child's language. And that's what you have to go with and just keep using it over and over and over again.
So what if I'm not law enforcement and I happen upon this? I'm the school nurse, I'm a therapist in private practice, or a school counselor. What do we go ahead and do? How do I facilitate getting this process handled?
Well, if you're a licensed, I was going to jump in real quick. I'll let you answer the question. I was okay, but if you carry a license in the state of Texas, you're a mandatory reporter through DFPS, and so we would ask that you reach out to the 1-800 number and make sure you can make a referral to DFPS, CPS, so that way they can get involved. I'll let Janeth take the rest of the answer.
I was actually going to say what you just said about, in the state of Texas is a mandated reporter, but specifically, those professionals, teachers, doctors, therapists, it's incredibly important that you make that report. I think also, especially for our first responders, and I've heard this feedback in a training is, well, a kid said that, uncle touched her on her area. And I didn't feel comfortable, just referring them to the CAC. Like, I needed to know what area was. And, for me, it's like, yeah, because area can be anything. So asking, okay, when you say area, what part of your body are you talking about? And that kid may point to their, female sexual organ or the male sexual organ. And then from there, okay, we've made it clear. It is obviously the private part. Now we have established that, something has happened to the child. Private parts, this is where I need to stop asking more questions. And now I need to make that report.
Absolutely. And I am surprised. I have dealt with licensed professionals that are asking me the question, do I have to call? I'm like, yes, you have to call. You got all the way through grad school. Let me help you dial the number. But sometimes they're, frightened or shocked or struggling with their own baggage in this area. And, they don't know what to do. So guiding them to call and calling a child protective services, certainly. But I also ask that question, is the perpetrator in the home? Is this someone that lives in that building? Because if this is the case, I need you to also call law enforcement. I had a situation at the school as a school counselor where the outcry happened at about 12:30. It took us a little bit of time. And then the bus is getting ready to, I'm like, this kid's not getting on the bus. The guy lives in the residence. So we had law enforcement out there. But I think it's another thing to also mention, more of an imminent threat that I can't, as a licensed therapist, as a human being with a heart, send this child home into that house if the perpetrator lives in that residence. So it can take 24 hours sometimes for Child Protective Services, Department of Families to answer, especially if it's an online thing. So I say do both, get that online paperwork started, but also call 911 and have a local officer dispatched immediately to go ahead and help you with this situation.
Yeah, Joseph, that's an excellent point. Is, a lot of people think, well, I'll make this referral online and then, it's immediately going to get read, something's going to happen. And unfortunately, even though technology is fast, it's not that fast, right? And we see this a lot where 2:30, 2:45, 3 o'clock is when law enforcement gets called and said, hey, like, we've had this child in here for 2 hours. We've waited for CPS to respond. We don't want to send them home. And so reaching out to law enforcement, and that gets back into that, what we call a priority one or a P1, is if that child does not have a safe place to go home to, then that call to law enforcement has to be simultaneously the same thing as the call to DFPS or CPS. So that way they can start getting en route to start trying to figure out how do we get the child down to the CAC for a forensic interview.
Excellent advice. Now tell me, as a first responder, as a clinician, as somebody working with children, I want to get more training. I want to get more information about how to effectively work in this area and help people. Where are some of the places I'm going to want to go ahead and learn more about this and get more resources and training for myself?
Yeah, so I'll talk about our lecture series that we have at the Dallas Children's Advocacy Center. So our lecture series is put on by our education department. And so it is trainings that we bring to DCAC, and they are free. They are free of charge for our first responders, for our professionals working, in these types of investigations. And we have them posted on our website. And, if that is something that, you are looking for, is that training in specific areas, we bring fantastic presenters from all around the world. And you'll be able to see who all is coming here in 2024. So that's one way that you can get plugged in to, the education that we bring on at our agency.
And then to follow up with Janeth, she mentioned our education and training department. If you have a community group, a church, PTA, and I know we do a lot of training at schools with mandatory reporters, they'll come out to your site and host a training over whatever topic that you feel is best needed by your community group, church, like I said, parent group or whatever. So they do a lot of presentations on weekends and at nights. Then obviously our Crimes Against Children's Conference. It's probably the largest conference in North America, and I'll dare to say probably the largest conference in the world when it comes to child abuse. It's held every October. We have about over 5,500 actual attendees. Last year, I think we hit 30 plus countries. And I know, Dallas is centrally located. It's an easy 2.5, 3 hour flight from anywhere in the United States. But if you look out to your CACs, I know just last week there was a child abuse conference in San Diego. I know this June there's one up in Washington, D.C. There's one in Nebraska. There's one in Alabama. And so there are child abuse trainings and lectures and conferences throughout the year all across the United States. And so, again, just going to those local child advocacy centers and seeing what kind of training they offer, I'm sure we can fulfill almost any need that you might have in this profession.
And our Crimes Against Children conference this year is the week of August 11th. And so registration, I'm not sure if it's completely open. I don't think it is quite yet. No, it's not. I'm an eager beaver. So once it opens, you can sign up for that. And all the information is on our website as well. It's a great conference, a great opportunity to network with other local law enforcement, other local child advocacy centers, Department of Protective Services. I mean, it truly is incredibly educational. And, you know, Mark said people from other countries. I know like last year, I interacted with some prosecutors from Australia and, you know, kind of getting insight on their process, and they're getting insight on our process. And what I'm learning is that a lot of countries are really coming to us to find out, like, how can I start a child advocacy center in my country? Because it is absolutely needed. And that's what we're here to do, is really support you and help navigate the process for you to take back this information to your country so that you can begin to hopefully eradicate child abuse in that country.
And also, Joseph, because I know this online presentation is for a lot of people already in the profession. You know, all of these conferences are looking for outside presenters. And so if you have a topic that's relatable to child abuse or relatable to child development or something that goes on into the investigative or therapeutic world, or even the medical world, you know, please reach out to the organizers. And I know right now we're accepting presenters, and say, hey, I have this topic, I have this presentation that I think would be beneficial for your attendees. You can make a submission online and then go through the approval process. And, you know, there's just a lot of great knowledge out there and a lot of experts. And I think that just kind of goes to show that there's so many conferences across the United States because the need is there, the need for localized training to support law enforcement and DFPS, because we know they don't have the budgets to really to travel as far as they probably want to or could. And so really having that localized experience is important. So if you have the capability to attend a conference and present on your expertise and your knowledge, it'd be beneficial to everybody involved.
We also offer scholarships. So, you know, in talking about these like small rural, you know, agencies, you might not have the funding. And I think sometimes that's also a barrier, right, to our first responders, is a lack of training money. And so, you know, I'm not law enforcement, but from what I've heard, is usually that's kind of like the first cut that goes, right, when they're trying to make decisions on budgets. And so being able to apply for that scholarship to see if it's something that, you know, you're granted so that you are able to come out and gain that experience at crimes.
Outstanding. You two have provided us a tremendous amount of information today about the process, about what you guys are offering, and how we can go ahead and help in this challenging area. As we start to wrap up today, what final messages do you have for our first responder community, for parents and people who can benefit from your services as we start to wrap up? Well, any last words and thoughts?
You're not in this alone. You know, I tell people all the time, when I started law enforcement, there was no way ever you would get me to work child abuse. And, you know, it wasn't sure long after my career when I would find myself working child abuse. And I considered it some of the most rewarding time of my career, as I said earlier. So just know that there is a large group of people that are here to support you, not only in your investigative side of things, but also in the mental health side of things, which is something I think we in law enforcement were hesitant to do or to acknowledge for a long time, and then we're getting better about it. So anything that we could do to help you in this spot and to help you through your case, or to help you just through your professional life as you go through this, is what we're here for, and what the MDT is here for, and what every CAC is here for. And so just reach out to us, reach out to your local CACs, and let us be there to support you in any way that we can as you go through this most difficult time.
I would completely agree with that. We can't do this work alone. And that's the beauty of the multidisciplinary team model is, you know, I think of it like a puzzle, right? And every single partner on our MDT is a puzzle piece. And we really cannot get the best outcomes for our families without each single piece. So we have to do this work together. I think that sometimes we can really get, we can really have these blinders on where we really just see like what we see as, you know, as social workers, as child protective services, law enforcement, forensic interviewers. But at the end of the day, like sometimes we forget why we do this work. And it's really because of the kids and the families that we are hoping to, you know, provide safety and protection for them. And we kind of get into our own like pride and in our own heads, right? But we really have to remember that we all have one common goal. And that is to make sure that kids are safe and that our families are feeling supported.
Especially in this field, we understand that training, specialized training when it comes to child abuse is sometimes difficult to find. And not only does DCAC, but a lot of CACs do a really, really good job of offering different types of training. So, if you go to our website, which is dcac.org, and then at the very, very top, you'll see a link that says training. And then once you click on training, below that, you'll see on the left side, you'll see a tab that says lecture series. And so there you'll see all of the lecture series that we have for this year. And like I'll highlight the very first class we have coming up in February 8th and 9th, which is a search warrant writing class by Mr. Wilson and Mr. Goodhart. These people actually wrote the book that the DA's office uses how to defend and write good search warrants. And then this type of training just goes throughout the year. You'll see another one, the fundamentals of interviews and interrogations, sexual abuse dynamics, a forensic interviewer at trial. Not everything that we do is law enforcement. We do a lot of different things for forensic interviewing or for CPS. And so this calendar gets updated and gets changed throughout the year. I know last year we had an aquatic death class, which was very fascinating and interesting to talk about. And so we do a lot of interviewing classes. We usually have the 5 B's of abuse. And so anytime you wanted some up-to-date information, all you have to do is go to that site and look for your training. And if you see something, I believe if you just click on the arrow below, register here, see that link comes up, just click on that, and then you can sign up for the classes. And all of our trainings are free. And most of the time, I'm not going to say all the time, most of the time we provide you lunch. So we try to make it as accommodating for our partners and for our outside visitors as well. And so if we have it within our budget, which we are very gracious to have some very wonderful donors and supporters who throughout the year support our lecture series program, we'll do our best to make sure that there's no cost to attend, and then we can also throw in lunch. But again, it's constantly updated, it's constantly changing. And we'll also throw this out there. If you see a class, or if you've been to a class that you've seen and that you thought would be great for the MDT or for all of our partners to take, reach out to us. Send us an email. It's training@dcac.org and say, hey, I saw this class, and we'll contact the instructor and find out, what the fees are and how can we facilitate them coming down here and teaching class for us. And so again, great donors, a great support network that allows us to do this for our partners.
Janeth and Mark, I want to thank you both for taking the time to visit with us today to share your expertise, your wisdom, and your knowledge with our first responder community and members. It's greatly appreciated, and we're looking forward to getting this episode out and the other 2 episodes of this 3-part series so that we can hopefully inform and educate and share and make more of our first responders comfortable as they navigate these challenging waters. So on behalf of the First Responder Behavioral Health Institute, I want to thank you both for taking the time to share your expertise and your time with us and our members today. So thank you both for being on Enroute.
Thank you so much for having us.
I'm Joseph Brigandi. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Enroute. Enroute is a production of the First Responder Behavioral Health Institute. To learn more about us, head on over to FRB